My name is Rowan Ellery, 38 years old. And 3 weeks ago, my father told me there was no room for me in his 4-bedroom house. He said it without hesitation, standing in the same doorway I once ran through as a child. His voice was calm when he explained that Madeline, my 16-year-old half-sister, needed all 3 of her personal rooms, 1 for sleeping, 1 for books, and 1 for art. She's developing her talents, he said, as if creativity required square footage. I asked him if Leo and I could stay for 2 weeks, just until I found another job. He barely met my eyes when he replied, "You made your choices. Rowan, don't drag the boy into your mistakes." I told him Leo was 18, not a boy, that he woke before dawn every day to work at a bakery so we could eat. He said, "That's not a career. That's a pity." The call ended before I could speak again, replaced by the hollow click of finality. Leo was sitting beside me in the car, his uniform still dusted with flour. He didn't say anything at first, just stared through the windshield, watching the Dallas lights blur into a thin gray fog. "He really said that about me?" he finally asked. And I nodded. He laughed once, the kind of sound people make when something breaks inside them. I reached for his hand and said, "We'll figure it out. We always do." That night, we parked behind a closed grocery store and slept with the engine off to save gas. I listened to the quiet, to Leo's steady breathing, and thought of the house where I wasn't welcome, the one filled with empty rooms and expensive silence. What my father didn't know was that someone else had been listening all along. 2 days after that call, I tried again. My father answered on the 3rd ring and sighed like I was a bill collector. I told him we just needed a corner of the house for 2 weeks, maybe less, until I found steady work. He said, "Rowan, your kid bakes bread for a living. That's not a future. That's charity in an apron." I said Leo was saving every dollar he earned, that he worked more hours than most adults I knew. My father replied, "That's not ambition. That's desperation." And before I could answer, Lydia's voice cut through the speaker asking if I was still begging. "You're 38, she said smoothly, "and you still can't take care of yourself. Maybe it's time you stopped blaming everyone else." My father didn't stop her. He just added, "She's right." And the line went silent again. Leo sat beside me eating a cold sandwich. Pretending not to have heard, he asked quietly, "Do they really think working is something to be ashamed of?" I told him no, but the words felt heavy in my mouth. He looked down at his hands, still marked with tiny burns from the oven trays, and said, "Then why do they sound so proud of doing nothing?" I didn't answer because I didn't have one. That night we parked near the Trinity River, where the hum of traffic almost drowned out the quiet. I counted what we had left, $53 in my wallet, 2 job applications pending, and one exhausted son trying to study calculus in the glow of a dashboard light. The bakery would give him another shift, but it still wouldn't cover rent anywhere in Dallas. I scrolled through my contacts until I found one name I hadn't called in years, Uncle Martin. He picked up fast, his voice steady and warm. When I told him what happened, he didn't sound surprised. "Your father's been living off your grandmother's generosity for decades," he said. "He's never owned that house." "Rowan, it's still in her name." I asked if he was sure, and he replied, "I drafted the deed myself. Maybe it's time you reminded Helen who's really been paying for his comfort." I ended the call staring into the dark, realizing that someone besides me had finally seen the truth. The next morning I called Grandma Helen. She answered on the 2nd ring, her voice firm and clear. Not at all like someone in her 80s. I said, "Grandma, it's Rowan. I'm sorry for calling out of nowhere." She replied, "Martin told me what your father said, and you don't need to apologize. You need to tell me everything." 8. I told her about the eviction, the car, Leo's bakery job, and the way Gregory mocked him for it. She listened without interrupting until I finished. Then she said quietly, "Your father hasn't changed. He humiliated your mother in front of me once, and I swore I'd never forgive him. Now he's doing the same to you." I didn't know what to say, but she continued, "He's living in my house, and I've allowed it long enough." I asked if she really meant that, if she'd ever planned to give him the house. "I meant to," she said, "when he still had decency. But now it's clear he's spent 30 years taking what doesn't belong to him." She paused long enough for me to hear her steady breath. "Tell me, Rowan, did he really say there was no room for you?" "When I said yes," she answered, "then he can find another roof, because that one's about to stop being his. I hope her." Her words hit like a sudden wind, cold and certain. I asked what she was planning, and she said, "An estate review meeting. I want every name that's living off my property in the same room." I told her Gregory would never come willingly, but she only said, "He will when he thinks he's about to inherit." For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to balance returning. Later that night, Leo asked who I'd been talking to. I told him his great-grandmother wanted to see us both. He frowned, unsure. "Does she even know what's going on?" I said she knew more than anyone. "That she'd been watching from a distance for years," he whispered. "Do you think she'll help us?" I said. "She doesn't talk about helping. She talks about setting things right." Before we hung up, Helen said, "Rowan, your mother was the best daughter-in-law I ever had. She didn't deserve the pain my son caused her. I let that guilt sit too long. It's time to correct it." Her tone softened and sharpened again. "Come to Dallas next week. Bring Leo. I'll handle the rest." I ended the call with the sound of her certainty still in my ear, realizing the quietest woman in the family had just declared war. Uncle Martin called 2 days later and said Grandma wanted everything ready before the meeting. He asked me to meet him at his office in downtown Dallas, where he handed me a folder thick with documents. "These are property tax statements," he explained. "Your father hasn't paid a cent in 30 years. Every check came from Helen's account." I stared at the pages and said, "So all those years he called it his house. It was just borrowed pride." Martin looked tired but certain. "Helen wants the facts clear. Gregory can't claim ignorance anymore. She'll show him everything in front of witnesses." I asked if she was sure she wanted it public, and he said, "She's waited half a lifetime for this. She's not interested in silence anymore." I nodded, realizing it wasn't revenge, it was proof, the kind that left no room for denial. That night, Leo found me sorting through the folder at a diner booth. "Is that about the house?" he asked. I told him yes, and that Grandma planned to confront them all next week. He frowned. "What if Grandpa twists it again?" "Makes it sound like you're ungrateful?" I said. "He can't twist numbers. Leo, they don't bend for ego." He reached across the table and said, "Then let's go tell the truth with her." Across town, Lydia was already anxious. Martin later told me she'd called my father, saying, "Helen's not well. If she wants to sign the house over, you should take her to a notary before that meeting." Gregory agreed, believing this would be a formality. He told her, "It's time to secure what's rightfully ours." She answered, "It's time to make sure Rowan stays out for good." Their confidence was built on decades of unchallenged comfort, and neither of them understood what Helen had planned. The night before the meeting, Leo sat beside me reading Grandma's letter again. "She sounds like she's not afraid of anything," he said. I told him she wasn't. "Not anymore." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe fear skips generations." I folded the letter and said, Maybe courage does too. Ix. The meeting began exactly at noon. Grandma Helen sat at the head of the long oak table, her hands resting on a folder marked with her initials. Gregory and Lydia arrived together, confident and polished, with Madeline trailing behind them. Uncle Martin greeted everyone politely and said, "We're here to discuss the ownership and future of the Rollins property." Any Bray. Gregory smiled thinly. "Mother, you didn't have to make this so formal. We could have handled it privately." Helen's voice was steady. "I want clarity, not convenience. You've lived in that house for 30 years, and it's time we review how that happened." Lydia interrupted. "We've maintained it, paid the bills, handled everything." Helen looked at her and said, "You've paid nothing. Every bill was settled from my account. Martin has the records." "Ass." My father's tone hardened. "You're bringing my daughter into this. She's been feeding you lies to get back at me." Helen's eyes didn't move. "Rowan doesn't need to lie. I have paper, 2 eyes, and bank statements. Facts don't require interpretation." Lydia tried to laugh. "You're not well. Helen, maybe we should let you rest before you do something you'll regret," Helen said. "The only regret I have is letting you two live off me this long." Martin opened a folder and placed several pages in front of them. "Here are the property tax receipts for the last 30 years. All paid by Helen Rollins. Not a single payment from Gregory Ellery." My father snapped. "You can't just spring this on me. This is still my home," Martin replied evenly. "Under Texas law, ownership is defined by the deed, not sentiment. The deed remains in Helen's name," Lydia whispered. "We thought she transferred it years ago," Helen said. "I never did. And now I'm glad." Gregory leaned forward. "Mother, you told me when you passed. The house would be mine." "You gave your word," Helen answered. "I said it would be yours when you deserved it. And that day never came." He turned red. "So you're humiliating me in front of strangers?" she said calmly. "You humiliated yourself when you mocked your grandson for working." Leo sat still beside me, silent but unflinching, and she looked toward him. "That boy has done more with his integrity than you have with your pride." Lydia rose, her voice sharp. "This is unfair. You can't just take away our home," Helen said. "It was never yours to begin with." Lydia turned to me. "You planned this, didn't you? You manipulated an old woman," I said quietly. "The only manipulation here was pretending generosity could hide greed." Madeline shifted uncomfortably and asked, "Dad, is it true Grandma owns the house?" Gregory didn't answer. Helen spoke instead. "It's true. And it always has been." Gasped. Gregory slammed his hand on the table. "You can't rewrite history." "Mother," Helen replied. "History doesn't need rewriting. It just needs witnesses." Martin lifted another envelope. "This is the trust agreement. Effective immediately. Helen Rollins transfers the property to Rowan Ellery and Leo Ellery under Section 112.05, of the Texas Trust Code. It's already notarized." The silence in the room was sharp enough to cut through the air. Lydia whispered, "You're ruining our lives," Helen said. "No, I'm correcting them." "Edo." Gregory looked at me, eyes hollow. "You think this makes you better than me?" I said. "No. It just means you finally have to live without pretending." He stood, his voice cracking. "You'll regret this," Helen answered. "I've spent decades regretting the wrong things. I won't add this to the list." Martin folded the documents and said, "As of today, the deed belongs to Rowan and Leo. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." Madeline's eyes filled with tears. Grandma, what happens to us? Helen's expression softened. You'll have a place to stay if you choose kindness over entitlement. Lydia muttered. You'll hear from our lawyer. Martin replied calmly. Please do. I'd enjoy explaining this under oath. My father's shoulders sank. Mother, can we at least talk privately? She said. You've had 30 years to talk. This conversation is over. He looked at me one last time. But I didn't look away. Helen closed her folder and said, Meeting adjourned. The sound of her voice was final, steady as truth itself. And no one argued again. A week after the meeting, news of what happened spread quietly through our neighborhood. One of Gregory's old colleagues called Martin, asking if the rumors were true. He confirmed that the deed had changed hands and that my father was moving out within the month. When I heard it, I felt neither victory nor guilt. Only relief that something finally ended. Lydia left before the 30 days were up, claiming she couldn't stand the humiliation. Madeline called once, her voice unsteady. Dad won't talk about it, she said. He just keeps saying everyone betrayed him. I told her. He betrayed himself. Madeline. The rest of us just stopped pretending not to see it. She whispered. I didn't know about you or Leo. I'm sorry, I said. You don't owe us an apology. You were raised inside his story. Not the truth. Dawn. By the 3rd week, the movers had cleared the last of their things. Helen asked if Leo and I were ready to move in. I said, We don't want to take more than we need. She smiled faintly and answered, You've taken nothing that wasn't already yours. Leo stood by the doorway holding a box of textbooks and said, It feels strange to live in a house that used to belong to someone who wouldn't open the door. Helen replied, Then make it a home that never closes one. I want not. A month later, I started work at a small design studio in Austin. It wasn't my old salary, but it was enough to rebuild piece by piece. Leo earned his promotion at the bakery and began saving for college. When his first paycheck arrived, he handed it to me and said, This time it goes toward our future, not survival. I told him, That's the difference between starting over and starting right. Take you. That evening, Helen gave me a set of keys wrapped in a ribbon. I won't live here forever, she said. But I wanted to know the house would stay with people who understand its worth. I thanked her. But she just said, Don't thank me. You earned what he only inherited. When Leo asked if we'd finally won, I said, We didn't win anything. Leo, we just stopped losing. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to Grandma Helen. I thanked her for giving us more than a house, for giving us the dignity my father once denied. When I sealed the envelope, Leo walked in and asked, Do you think she knows how much she changed our lives? I said. She does. That's why she never asked for thanks. End quote. Outside, the air felt still. No longer heavy with worry, Leo leaned against the doorway and said, Mom, we're finally okay. Aren't we? I told him. We were okay the moment we stopped waiting for permission to be. He smiled. And the silence between us was gentle for once. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story reached you, take a breath and remember, peace isn't something you beg for, it's something you build. Share your thoughts below. I read every single one.